All right, get ready for this because this is, well, it's a bit of a wild one. We're going to explore how South Park, of all things, might just be the best explainer for a super radical and, frankly, mind-bending theory of reality. I know it sounds nuts, but stick with me on this.
So here's the big question we're trying to answer today. What if the show is complete and total absurdity isn't a flaw? What if it's the entire point? What if there's a hidden logic to all the chaos? A logic that, believe it or not, lines up perfectly with a pretty out-there theory in physics.
And let's just remind ourselves what these rules are, right? Kenny dies all the time. Aliens and gods are just, part of the scenery. The entire world can get destroyed in the next week. Poof, everything's back to normal. The show hits a hard reset button every single episode. That's the puzzle we're trying to figure out.
And the key to unlocking this puzzle, weirdly enough, comes from this theoretical idea called the information manifold model. It's a way of looking at our reality that honestly feels like something the creators of South Park would have come up with themselves. It's that strange. Okay, so what on earth is the IMM? Well, to put it simply, imagine that every single possible outcome of anything already exists, all at once, all together in this vast, higher dimensional space. The reality that we experience every day, it's just one specific slice or projection that gets selected from that massive space. Yeah, it's a total break from how we normally think about a single timeline unfold.
All right, now this is where it gets really fun. We're going to take these big, abstract ideas from physics and map them directly onto the world of South Park. And we'll use three things: the town, the episodes, and, yep, you guessed it, Kenny. So the first building block of this whole theory is the information manifold itself. The best way to picture it is like a giant library of every possibility. Every story that could ever happen is a book on the shelf, and they're all there at the same time, just waiting to be picked out. So, here's the crucial first step in our analogy. The town of South Park is the information manifold. You see, the town isn't just one place where one story happens. It's the container that holds all possible South Park stories. And that makes the town an incredibly, permissive space. Aliens, gods, a talking piece of Christmas poo. At the level of the town itself, none of these things contradict each other. Everything is allowed to exist as a potential inside that South Park manifold. Okay, so if everything's possible at once, how do we get a single, coherent reality out of it? Well, that brings us to the next key idea, which is projection. This is basically the act of selecting one coherent story out of that giant chaotic space. Think of it less like time moving forward, and more like just choosing a specific reality to look at. And here's the perfect connection. A single episode of South Park is a projection. Each week, the writers just reach into the town's infinite potential and pull out one specific temporary storyline. And that's exactly why they can ignore whatever happened last week. They're not continuing a timeline. They're just creating a brand new projection. Now, inside that projection, inside that single episode, things actually happen. And this brings us to collapse. In physics, a collapse is simply when a possibility becomes a reality. An electron isn't everywhere anymore, it's right here. The really important part of this theory, though, is that the collapse doesn't destroy the other possibilities. It just selects one for that specific moment. And here it is. Kenny's death is a perfect and hilarious example of a collapse. For that one episode, that one projection, the outcome, Kenny dies, is selected. It becomes real. But the underlying manifold, the town of South Park, is completely unchanged. The possibility of Kenny is alive is never erased, which is why he's just back next week, no questions asked. So let's just recap that, because it's basically our dictionary for this whole thing. The information manifold is the town of South Park. A projection from that manifold is any single episode. A collapse is a specific event in that episode, like Kenny dying, and the proof that the manifold itself persists, Kenny always comes back. It's just an incredibly clean fit. Okay, so we've got the basic framework down. But now, let's go deeper. Let's see how this crazy analogy can also explain some of the other weird aspects of the show, like its completely broken continuity and its most infamous character. Now, this next concept is a real mind-bender. It's called observer-imposed local coherence. The theory suggests that consistency, things making sense, isn't a fundamental property of the universe. Instead, it only appears when and where an observer, that's us, is paying attention and requires things to add up. And in the world of South Park, the audience is the observer. The only reason a plot holds together from the start of an episode to the end is because our attention is demanding it. We need it to be coherent for the jokes to land. But the show doesn't have to make sense across seasons because it only needs to be consistent for the 22 minutes we're watching.
And this leads to this amazing conclusion. The show's famous continuity errors aren't mistakes. They're direct evidence for the model. They prove that the whole system can work perfectly fine by just creating little pockets of consistency on demand without ever having to worry about a big, overarching story.
Okay, now for another wild idea. Geometry-driven dynamics. This suggests that what looks like free choice is often just following the easiest path. Think of it like a marble rolling downhill. It isn't choosing to go down, it's just following the shape of the landscape. Some outcomes are just easier to fall into than others.
And who is the ultimate example of this? Eric Cartman, of course. This theory would suggest that Cartman isn't really choosing to be a monster in every single scenario. He is what's called a forced attractor. He's a point in the system where selfish, chaotic, awful behavior is the most probable, almost gravity-like outcome.
So this is the geometry that creates Cartman. The writers create a situation with selfish incentives where all authority is useless and where morality is a total mess. Once you set up that landscape, Cartman's monstrous behavior becomes almost a law of nature for the show. He's not really a character with free will, he's geometry with a mouth. So, why does this all fit so well? I mean, is it just a funny coincidence? The argument is no. It works because the show, completely by accident, gives us this perfect, intuitive model for concepts that are normally buried in really complex mathematics. I mean, just look at what South Park demonstrates every single week without even trying. It shows us that continuity is optional. It shows us that a collapse, an event, does not delete the other possibilities. It proves that consistency is relative to whoever's watching, and that you can reset the entire system without any contradictions. These are the core counterintuitive claims of the series, just played out for laughs.
And that brings us to the whole idea in a nutshell. What if reality is less like a continuous story and more like South Park? Just a stable underlying structure that gets projected into these temporary episodes, where events happen and consistency only shows up when we demand it. It suggests our reality might not be the grand movie we think it is, but more like a chaotic TV show with a surprisingly stable set.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final and deeply unsettling question. If the rules of reality really do mirror the logic of South Park, then what does that make us? Are we the kids? Are we the observers just watching it all? Or are we just another character whose fate gets totally reset at the end of every episode? Something to think about.